Hello, welcome to Walk in the Park. My name is Tony Ingram, your host, and today is, let's see, June 25th, 2014. This is episode 79. If you want to see all my episodes of Walk in the Park, go to my vid blog, walkinpark.com. Okay. Well, this week we're going to go to a very special park. In fact, one of the most important and one of the first parks in the country and even the world. And that one is in California. Now, right in the sort of the center east of California, you can see that green dot there. It says Yosemite National Park, east of San Francisco, maybe 4 hours, and north of Los Angeles, maybe 6 or 7 or so, up in the high Sierra Nevada mountains. And it's one of the oldest state and national parks, actually, as I'll explain, in the country. Okay, so here is a National Park Service map of Yosemite National Park showing the roads in the park and the principal areas. And you can see that there's a central road going across the park. That's the Tioga Pass Road, and that's actually closed in the winter because it gets very snowy up there. That just opened up recently. I was out there. I'm doing this show because I was out there a couple of weeks ago. So, and then there's roads that go down to the southwestern part of the park. And the rest of it is wilderness. Most of the park is wilderness. So it's a pretty interesting place. And let's go into Yosemite Valley. Now you look at you see the main road going across the park. And then just below that, you can see a couple of roads going to the east. That is from left to right. In the middle of it, you can see Yosemite Valley there. That is the original part of the park that was created, and it's also the most popular. And most people go to Yosemite Valley, and the large majority of people don't get to the rest of the park. So let's go to Yosemite Valley. This is one of the views that you can get from one of the overlooks, one of the roads into Yosemite Valley. And this is a classic view of the valley, going back into the 1800s. Views, photographs, even drawings, paintings, and so forth. And some of the most famous landscape features that you can see in this view, on the left, that high cliff is called El Capitan, and we'll get into that more. And then on the right, there's a waterfall. You can see sort of right of center, that dark area, that's Bridal Veil Falls. And way in the back in the center, just above center, is a half dome, and we'll be looking at that. So that's one area. And then another area of the park that's heavily visited, and it's also one of the original areas of the park, is the Mariposa Giant Sequoia Grove. This is the location of the largest grove. I think it's some 480 giant sequoia trees. There's not very many of them, just a few thousand, I guess, in the world. They're all in the Sierra Nevada. And let's go back up to this map here. You look down on the bottom there, the very bottom of the map, it says, you might be able to see it on the screen, Mariposa Grove. So that's another very famous and popular part of the park. The part of the park that's less visited is the high country, the high Sierra that gets up over 13,000 feet high. This is looking from one of the summits down on Tuolumne Meadows, which is a popular area, but you can only get there pretty much in the summer. And some trails take off from there. Years ago, back in 1969, 45 years ago, I hiked in Yosemite National Park and went way back up in Tuolumne Meadows and way down to the south on the John Muir Trail, which goes over 200 miles in the High Sierra down to Sequoia National Park to the south. So let's go back to our view looking east into Yosemite Valley, and we'll look at, on the left, that high cliff is El Capitan. And some of the time I'll do some more detailed photographs and explanations of El Capitan, but this cliff is over 3,500 feet high. That's about 2/3 to 3/4 of a mile high, and it's one of the most famous climbing cliffs in the world. So you can actually, when I get into more detail in a future show about some of the aspects of Yosemite, I will actually show you a picture of a guy on the cliff here, but they're very hard to find. But people go there with their binoculars and so forth and try to see if they can see a climber, and they're very small, and you can see it in this picture. Then over on the right-hand side, you see that dark area once again in the cliff. That's Bridal Veil Falls, and looking up at it now from across the Merced River, which goes through the valley. And that waterfall, even though it doesn't look like there's a lot of water on it now, that one flows year-round, but not all the waterfalls do. But that one flows year-round. It has a reliable source of water. So, but now we're going to look at the most famous waterfall. Won't say it's the most famous waterfall in the country. That's probably Niagara Falls, but it's the most famous waterfall in the park. And it's one that I really wanted to see, hadn't seen in so many years. And this one doesn't flow year-round. In fact, later in the summer, it'll dry up. And in fact, this time of year, normally, whatever normally is anymore with climate change, there's more water on it. And but this is good. So I went in June so that I could see this waterfall with water on it. Because if I went in August, there might not be any water on it. And it's been, California has been experiencing, I guess, the worst drought in its recorded history. And scientists are saying that's probably a function of the overall drought and caused by the heating of the atmosphere in climate change. In any case, I got to see it because I went there early enough in the season to see it, and I was thrilled. The Yosemite Falls, get out a couple of statistics about it here. It is the highest waterfall in North America. Now you can see actually two waterfalls, the upper right and then the extreme lower left. You might still be able to see on the screen the lower falls. Here's another view of it. Now you can see both of them. There's actually 3 sets of waterfalls in Yosemite. The whole waterfall from top to bottom of the 3 sets of falls is 2,425 feet high, and that makes it the 6th highest waterfall in the world, although there's a recent discovery of something called Gokta Cataracts, and I forget where that is, that sometimes appears on some lists as making Yosemite 7th, but whatever. Certainly the highest in North America. Now if you compare it to our waterfalls, Teganic Falls is 215 feet high, and this is 2,415 feet. So, I'm sorry, 2,425 feet. Now the upper fall is in the upper right there. That is 1,430 feet, and it itself is among the 20 highest waterfalls in the world. Let's see the lower, and then there's a set of middle cascades that are really not visible from most locations. Most people don't even see it, so they may be a little bit more visible here. But and they fall, they account for about 675 feet of drop. And let's see, more than twice the lower fall, which is 320 feet, which is about, the lower fall there is about 100 feet, a little bit more than 100 feet higher than Teganic Falls. So this is really waterfalls on another whole order of magnitude of waterfalls. So we're going to take a look at a little video I made of Yosemite Falls, and I pieced together. So let's go to that now.
Wayne just picked up. 다 나와 저 배경이?
Okay, so that last viewpoint there was from right in front of the Park Visitor Center. So let's go to that. There's the Visitor Center there, and up in the upper left there you can see the upper Yosemite Falls. So quite a setting. A lot of different places obviously in the valley that you can see that incredible waterfall, the tallest in North America. Okay, so you go inside the Visitor Center, and they have an information desk, and there's a little museum and a gift shop, and there's also a relief map of the valley. And this is looking from the perspective, the other direction, essentially from the east in the High Sierra, but obviously higher up in the air, as it were, and to the west as the valley goes down. And the lower center there, you see this sort of knob sticking up in the middle there. Well, that is one of the other very famous landmarks in Yosemite Valley. There it is, looking from a place called Washburn Point, I think it is. Half Dome. Looks like a mountain has been sheared in half. Well, not exactly, but it certainly looks that way. In the back you can see the high country. But this forms the backdrop for Yosemite Valley from lots of perspectives. Here it is now, looking from a place called Glacier Point, one of the most famous viewpoints in the park, and actually had this particular view had a huge impact on the history of our national park system, as we'll talk about later. So, but down in the valley, most of the time, most people are in the valley. Many do get up to, most do maybe get up to Glacier Point to see this view of Half Dome. But look down in the valley there, all that green down there. That's where there are campground and trails, and there's a a tent colony called Curry Village and Curry Village, and then there's Yosemite Village. There's a little city down there, and we'll talk about that some other time. But Yosemite is one of the most popular parks, something like 3.7 million visitors a year. Now, that's quite a lot. So, but most people are down in the valley and they get this perspective of Half Dome. Now, that is one incredible cliff. People do climb it, but it's almost, I think it's something like 4,800 feet high. It's almost a mile. It's approaching a mile high. And just to give you another perspective on it, we'll go to another national park. Just look at a picture of another national park, Grand Canyon. And we're looking from the south rim to the north rim. And in the middle of the picture is the inner canyon, and down in there is the Colorado River. Now, the Grand Canyon is said to be about a mile deep. It's actually about the same as the height of Half Dome. So you take this depth of the Grand Canyon, you take the width of it, and you squeeze it together, and you get Yosemite Valley with the same, almost the same amount of relief, at least in some spots, as you have in the Grand Canyon, which is as much as 15 miles wide in places. So really quite a dramatic scenic landscape. So if you're out in front of the visitor center right now, you'll see this banner. This is 150 years, 1864 to 2014. And on the left, California State Parks. Oh my gosh, 1864 to 2014. And on the right, Yosemite Grant. Aha, also 1864 to 2014. So that has something to do with the history of this national park. And the Yosemite Grant was the first federal land that was designated to be for everybody, for the public. And to tell that story, and that it became a state park, California State Park, but it eventually became a national park. But to tell that story, I'm going to go to another video, this one made by the Yosemite Conservancy, and we'll pull that up right now.
The Yosemite Grant was the first time in all of human history that a large tract of wild land was set aside not for the exclusive use of the rich or royalty of a nation, but for everyone and for all time. A hinge of history was moving in 1864 when they set Yosemite aside.
When that bill was passed and signed by President Abraham Lincoln, we were in the midst, the depths, the worst year of the American Civil War, where casualties numbering 2,000 a day were coming back to Washington, D.C. And the same day that Lincoln signed into law the act setting aside Yosemite, he also signed into law an increase in an income tax to help pay for the war that he hoped would save his country.
First of all, most Americans believe that national parks have always been here, that they are the product of some sort of automatic process. And the truth is, they haven't always been here, and they are only the result of visionary people engaging in a long, hard fight to try to save a place from destruction. In the 19th century, up until the Yosemite Grant, the business of Congress was to dispose of public land through homesteads, for miners, for lumbermen, for the railroads. And something about this place made us stop. Say, at least here, let's do something different. When people compare it to a cathedral, that tells you something, that they see it as a sanctuary, as a refuge. It has the walls, it has the sacramental water that flows into it. It has all those elements that are both awe-inspiring and yet somehow comforting, at least in the valley. And then you go to the Mariposa Grove, and you're standing there with these living things that have been there for thousands of years. And you have to be a pretty callous and callow person not to be in awe and in reverence of these living things. And it's all about this great idea. An idea that when it was first proclaimed was as radical and unique as the Declaration of Independence, which was to say that a nation's most majestic and special, and some would say sacred places, should be set aside not for the rich and for royalty and the well-connected, but for everyone and for all time. And when that was first applied here to Yosemite, that was a historic moment that led not only to national parks throughout the United States, but led to national parks across the world copying the model that had its first germination of a seed here in Yosemite.
Okay, that's why I didn't put my video after that one, because that was professionally done, obviously. I actually met the director and producer, Stephen Baumgartner, who works for the Yosemite Conservancy, and he's revived a tradition called Yosemite Nature Notes, which used to be a publication which ceased publishing some years ago, and then the Yosemite Conservancy decided to revive it with videos to go online. So pretty cool. Well, so what's this? It was a state park created by the federal government at the urging of some people, including, let's get this guy here, Galen Clark, and then Frederick Law Olmsted, who is considered to be one of the father of American landscape architecture. That's not everybody agrees with that, but he certainly is a giant in the field, starting out the landscape architecture. And he lived in California at the time, and there was a Senator McConnell, I think his name was. Anyway, they lobbied Lincoln to save this place. They were artists that were recording the beauty of the place, because there were commercial interests that were moving in. We're going to turn it into a playground for the rich, or agricultural development, what have you. Anyway, you heard that story. So Galen Clark, an interesting person. He was known as the first European American to discover the Mariposa Grove of big trees, those giant sequoias we were talking about earlier. Let me get that picture back here. Giant sequoias. There we go. Here's in the Mariposa Grove. I was able to get down to that. So Galen Clark was he's notable for his role in gaining legislation to protect it and the Yosemite area, and for 24 years he serves as the guardian of Yosemite Park, which at that time was a like I said, a state reservation. Hadn't really come up with the idea of state parks. Now I worked for New York State Parks for many years, and we said that Niagara Falls is the oldest state park in the country. And that very well could be true. It was created in 1885, and Frederick Law Olmsted had a role in that. And in fact, he planned that park out because it was wanted to protect the falls from hydroelectric exploitation, which of course there's been quite a lot of, but at least around the falls itself, there is a park. And so that park still exists. Yosemite State Park became Yosemite National Park through the efforts of another guy. Well, here's a picture of the Yosemite area and the transportation routes, stagecoaches and railroad lines to the park before it was a national park. But it was this guy, John Muir. Many people, he's probably the most famous person in American conservation of the 19th century. And we'll have a story about John Muir in our next episode, actually. There's a little mention of him before. But he fell in love with the place. He came there after the state park was created in the late 1860s, and he fell in love with the Sierra Nevada, and he pushed to have a national park created around the state area, and then eventually he came to feel that and he did. He succeeded in that and formed the Sierra Club. He was the founder of the Sierra Club, and they succeeded in getting a national park created, much larger area around. Much of the map that I showed you before was created, I think it was around 1890 or so. And meanwhile, Yellowstone National Park had been created in 1872 in a territory which was didn't have a state to hand over the responsibility to. So that became the first true national park. It was run by the federal government. But then the Yosemite National Park was created, and then 1903, John Muir on the right took President Roosevelt, up into Yosemite and took him for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days back into the wilderness there. This is Glacier Point with Yosemite Falls in the background, and showed him this incredible landscape. And in 1906, the park became this Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove, which were still under state management, became national park, part of the national park. So that was also, by the way, the same year that Watkins Glen State Park was created, our first state park in the Finger Lakes region in New York, although there were a number of other parks in the state, particularly in the Thousand Islands, that predated that. So we'll end with this quote here from John Muir. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. So that's one of his famous quotes, and that sort of implies the future science of ecology, when we realize everything is connected, something that our Native American forebears understood, but we as European Americans have had to learn kind of the hard way. So John Muir was one of the early sages in that regard. So all right, so we're coming down to the end of our show here. I want to thank you for joining us. If you want to see this show again or other shows, go to walkinpark.com. Again, this is recorded on June 25th, episode 29, 2014. So thanks for joining me.